Jingle All The Way is a really weird Christmas movie. It features some silly lines from Arnold Schwarzenegger, an iconic role for Phil Hartman, the most memorable film role for the usually forgettable Sinbad, and a poorly aged scene of Jake Lloyd drinking booze. Watching the film as an absurd reflection of consumerism that stumbles to make a point about commercialism during Christmas is a bizarre experience. Watching this Minnesota-based film as a Minnesotan, however, makes the film extra amusing. This cartoonish version of the Twin Cities is so ridiculous that one has to laugh at the absurdities and exaggerations. Now, an outsider might remark that exaggerations of real-life locations in movies are common. And that's true, but a perception is forged from said media when there is limited exposure. For instance, there are so many films set in New York City that one can recognize enough of the landmarks and cultures even if they have never been there. Minnesota has fewer mainstream movies set here, and thus, a limited perception is generated. Some outsiders might know about Minnesota's Mall of America, but they probably couldn't tell you what city it's located in. To make this regional humor more relatable, I'll explain the Minnesotan absurdities of Jingle All The Way. As the movie begins, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character of Howard is running late for his son's karate graduation ceremony. I can't tell you precisely where Howard works, but the graduation ceremony takes place at an elementary school in Falcon Heights, a suburb of St. Paul. It doesn't matter which city he's coming from if he's taking 494, you will always encounter traffic on 494. Howard is pulled over in traffic by the Twin Cities police. This is not a real police force, but since Howard's adventures take him all around the Twin Cities, the film just uses this generic identification for the cops. It's like all the cops just merged into one shitty being. Having failed his son, Howard returns to his suburban home located in Edina, a suburb closer to Minneapolis than St. Paul. This location does and does not make sense. It makes sense financially, as Edina is a wealthy area with houses big enough to film in, and it is centrally located in the Twin Cities, making it believable that Howard could travel from city to city for his big toy hunt. It is not plausible, however, that Jamie's karate class would be held at a school on the opposite side of the Twin Cities. Okay, so Howard's day-long search for a Turbo Man doll on Christmas Eve starts with a trip to downtown St. Paul, just outside the Palace Theater. And look, I get it, St. Paul made for a great shooting location, but it is ballsy to drive to that downtown area from Edina on Christmas Eve. But it's all for nothing, as Howard fails to buy a Turbo Man doll, and his quest continues. Worth noting in the driving shopping montage is that one of the places he drives to shop at is the Minnesota Children's Museum. Okay, that's a terrible location for finding an in-demand toy, but I mean, hey, you drove all the way to St. Paul and you might as well make the most of it. He also apparently drives past the State Theater in Minneapolis. Like, dude, where the hell are you going? Oh, he needs to make a call from a payphone in a Minneapolis suburb. Yeah, okay, it's the mid-90s, probably didn't have a cell phone, that tracks. And I mean, you gotta call in at home to make sure that your neighbor isn't eating your cookies.
Put that cookie down!
No!
So Howard's next destination is the toy store located at the Mall of America, arguably one of the most notable Minnesota landmarks in the film. And it's kind of bizarre that Howard's route thus far has had him going east to St. Paul, west to Minneapolis, and then south to Bloomington. I mean, this is an erratic route. Worth noting at the Mall of America is Howard stumbling into Camp Snoopy, the indoor theme park located in the center of the mall. And there's some nostalgia in these scenes because Camp Snoopy is no longer at the mall, replaced by Nickelodeon Universe in 2008. Okay, so this is a bit of a tangent, but I don't know where else to talk about this. The Mall of America was also used as a shooting location for the 2015 biopic The End of the Tour. The film highlights the time spent between the famed writer David Foster Wallace and the journalist David Lipsky set in Minnesota in 1996. In the film, they took a trip to the Mall of America and a visual issue arose in the historical accuracy. There's a scene where the two of them are eating at the food court while talking, and it's a nice spot to shoot considering it overlooks the theme park where natural lighting bleeds in through the windows above. However, it also overlooks the theme park, which would have revealed Nickelodeon Universe 12 years before it was branded. So instead of shooting away from the park or recreating Camp Snoopy, the film decides to just blur the theme park to obscure as much of the Nickelodeon branding as possible. And they tried to cover it up, but it just looks like Nickelodeon Universe. You can still make out all the iconography even with the blur, and every time time I look at this movie, I just look at that scene and go like, that is not the Camp Snoopy of the 1990s, no matter how hard you try to blur the background. Now, nearly everything has changed about the Mall of America since Jingle All The Way, as there is no KB toys to run through or ball pit to get smacked in. But the mall itself is still there. In fact, many malls are still in Minnesota. You know the mall from Mallrats? That's the Eden Prairie Mall, and it's still open in Eden Prairie. Have you ever wondered which was the first indoor mall in America? That's the Southdale Center, and it's still open in Edina. Minnesota is the land of anti-dead malls. Sorry, that was another tangent. Back to Jingle All The Way. After receiving a tip from a Santa actor about some Turbo Man dolls, Howard heads to a warehouse run by toy bootleggers. The spot for this operation is the Nicollet Island Pavilion in Minneapolis, which is the last place I would ever want to conduct a secret bootlegging operation. Seriously, the Nicollet Island Pavilion is a historic industrial building that was converted into an event space for weddings. If the Santa gang were to head just a few blocks north, there were plenty of less obvious warehouses to work within. But hey, the pavilion is a neat location, and I'm sure somebody out there is pleased that they can get married in the same area where Arnold Schwarzenegger fought some Santa Clauses. After escaping the fighting Santas and the raiding cops, Howard takes a break at Mickey's dining car in St. Paul and just, what? Why did you drive all the way back to St. Paul just to go to a diner? There are plenty of diners in Minneapolis. Again, I understand why this choice was made on a filmmaking level. Mickey's dining car looks like an unmistakable diner, and the location in St. Paul leads into the next scene for this city. But I'm sorry, if this is a ticking clock story about finding a rare toy, going from a Santa bootlegger ring in Minneapolis to a coffee break in St. Paul is just jarring. I mean, this is a guy who couldn't make it to his son's karate class on time in the St. Paul suburbs, yet he's able to speed back and forth from Minneapolis to St. Paul on Christmas Eve when there's a massive parade setting up in downtown Minneapolis. This really is a Christmas fantasy film. The next stop for finding a Turbo Man doll is at the classic rock radio station of 92 KQRS. This is a real radio station, but Martin Mull plays the head DJ, and this runs in sharp contrast to reality. The lead radio host on KQRS at the time was Tom Bernard, a blowhard baby boomer who would use his radio platform to bitch about Minnesota's influx of Hmong refugees. In 1998, he argued that the refugees should assimilate or hit the goddamn road, and when criticized for his words, Tom doubled down and said that he could attack whoever he wanted. The community action against racism eventually forced the radio station to issue an apology, but Tom Bernard remained on air for decades, continuing to spout bigoted views until he retired in 2022. Well, not really retire. I mean, he tried to break into podcasting, but it doesn't sound like it's going well since his show no longer airs on local radio, and he's walking away from podcasting next year. I do find it odd that out of all the nasty and mean characters that Howard runs across in the Twin Cities, the biggest pushover is the radio host of KQRS. I guess they couldn't be too accurate, otherwise Martin Mull's character would be making racist jokes about Sinbad. Finally, the climax arrives with a Christmas parade in downtown Minneapolis, and this is easily the biggest exaggeration in the film. Minneapolis does have a holiday parade, but it's nothing like the one in the film. The parade at the time was the Holidazzle. It was a much smaller parade, which is why it was typically held on the Nicollet Mall route. It wasn't held on Christmas, but a few days before. The Holidazzle was also held in the evening, which was ideal for the lit parade floats. Now, for being at night, it was usually very cold, and when I was living downtown, I tried to get there early and score a spot in the Skyway to watch the parade from, where it was, nice and warm instead of cold right there out on the street. But since a more charming display of lights amid the cold darkness of winter doesn't make for a silly set piece, the film favors this midday Macy's-style parade down 2nd Avenue and is given the fictional title of the Wintertainment Parade. And since 2nd Avenue would never be able to accommodate such a ridiculously overblown parade, the film favors a fictitious 2nd Avenue that was filmed in California. Now, the director had apparently stated that he wanted the climax to be the traditional Holidazzle parade, but was ultimately overruled. And the mind just boggles at how wild Arnold's Turbo Man suit would look in the darkness of night. I do find it hilarious how Minneapolis only experiences a massive influx of traffic when the parade starts and never any time before it. Like, Howard had no problem going from St. Paul to Minneapolis to Bloomington to Minneapolis to St. Paul to Edina before the sun starts setting, but within the span of an hour, all the traffic occurs as though cars just drop from wormholes in the sky. Oh well, at least Howard can zoom home in a jetpack, the same way that he spun around the Minneapolis skyline. So yeah, that's Jingle All The Way, a ridiculous film that is all the more absurd from a Minnesotan perspective. There is a sequel to Jingle All The Way, but it has no relation to the characters or setting of the first film, much like the sequel to Kindergarten Cop, which I'm sure nobody knew existed until just now. Jingle All The Way 2 also swaps out Minnesota for British Columbia, and Arnold Schwarzenegger for Larry the Cable Guy, so no, fuck that movie. So there you have it, my take on Jingle All The Way. So happy holidays, stay safe, and don't sacrifice yourself for consumerism on Black Friday. Just stay home and eat cookies.
Oh, these cookies! I gotta get the recipe from Les.
クッキーに手を出すな！わかったか！